Let me ask you a question. Not the type of question that you're gonna scroll past or forget a few minutes later, but the kind of question that actually sits with you. How does a man with no college degree, no real credentials, no clearly defined career end up worth hundreds of millions of dollars, owning private islands, moving in circles with billionaires, politicians, and global elites, and somehow avoid consequences for years, even after being exposed? Today, we're here to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm not just giving you a biography, I'm giving you a complete, full, start-to-end story on this man. Because Epstein's rise doesn't make sense on the surface. And when something doesn't make sense, you have to stop looking at the story and start looking at the system behind it. Because what you're about to see isn't just about one man becoming powerful. It's about how power is built, how it protects itself, and how sometimes it allows the worst people imaginable to climb to the very top. We've all been taught this idea that the richest people in the world are self-made, that they started from nothing, worked harder than everyone else, and earned every dollar that they have. It's one of the most powerful narratives in modern society because it gives people hope. If they can do it, so can I. But when you actually start looking into the lives of the ultra wealthy, the narrative starts to break. Because most of them don't come from nothing. They came from privilege, from connections, from environments designed for success. But Epstein is different. On paper, he actually did come from a relatively modest background. Born in Brooklyn in 1953, raised in a working class household, parents doing regular jobs just to get by. There's nothing in the early stages of his life that screams, this person will one day control massive wealth and influence. But here's where things start to get uncomfortable. Because somewhere between the normal childhood and the version of Epstein we've all come to know, there's a gap. A massive, unexplained gap. And the deeper you look into it, the more it becomes clear. This wasn't just ambition, this was strategy. As a kid, Epstein was described as intelligent, exceptionally good at math, comfortable in academic environments, able to process complex ideas quickly. He even graduated high school early. So on the surface, you would say, okay, he's just gifted. But intelligence alone doesn't explain what comes next. Because after dropping out of college, he somehow lands a job teaching at one of the most elite private schools in New York, the Dalton School. This is where the children of family wealthies go. Executives, artists, influential figures. And you're telling me a college dropout with no teaching degree just walks into that environment and gets hired? That's not normal. That's not merit-based. That's access. And access is something Epstein learned to navigate very early. Now, during his time there, students described him in a very specific way. Charismatic, engaging, different, but also unusual. Too comfortable, too familiar. Especially in situations where boundaries should have existed. Now, to be clear, at this time, there were no criminal charges. He wasn't being accused of anything. But the discomfort, the pattern of behavior, it was there. And what's important in this is that people noticed, but nothing happened. He wasn't removed because of behavior. He was removed because he wasn't qualified. And that tells you everything you need to know about how environments like that operate. This is where Epstein's life changes completely. Because losing that job should have been a setback. For most people, it would be. But Epstein didn't lose momentum. He redirected it. Because while he was at Dalton, he wasn't just teaching, he was building relationships with people connected to wealth. And through those connections, he gets introduced to Wall Street. Specifically, a major investment firm, Bear Stearns. Now, think about what that means. One of the most competitive financial environments in the world, where people with Ivy League degrees struggle to get in. And Epstein gets a position with no degree, no formal experience, and it gets even worse, because when he applied, he lied, completely fabricated his credentials, claimed degrees he never earned, and eventually they found out. So what happened next? Does he get fired? Does he face consequences? No, nothing happens. He stays. And at that moment, that exact moment is one of the most important turning points in the entire story, because that's when Epstein learned something powerful. If you're useful enough, truth doesn't matter. Working on Wall Street didn't just make Epstein money. It taught him how the world actually works at the highest level. He learned how wealth is protected, how systems are bent, how rules are selectively enforced, and importantly, he learned how rich people think. Because here's the reality. The ultra wealthy don't operate like normal people. They don't prioritize fairness. They don't prioritize morality. They prioritize outcomes. If you can make them money, save them money, or protect their money, they'll overlook almost everything else. Epstein became very, very good at positioning himself as that person. He understood tax structures, financial strategies, asset protection, but beyond all of that, he understood psychology. He knew how to make people feel like they needed him, how to create fear, then present himself as the solution. And that combination is extremely dangerous. As Epstein rises, the warning signs don't disappear. They increase. There are accusations of insider trading, misuse of funds, questionable financial behavior, and every single time the consequences are minimal. A fine here, a suspension there, nothing that actually stops his trajectory. And eventually, he leaves Bear Stearns. But here's what's important. He doesn't leave with nothing. He leaves with connections, credibility, and access to powerful people, building off of what he left while working at the college. And at that point, he no longer needs the system because now he is part of it. After Wall Street, Epstein builds his own world. Consulting firms, financial services, private dealings with wealthy clients. But what he's really building is a network of influence, because at his level, money is just the entry point. Power comes from relationships, and Epstein positioned himself right in the center of those relationships. One of the most significant being his connection to Leslie Wexner, a billionaire, founder of Victoria's Secrets, and somehow Epstein convinces him to hand over control of his finances. Not just advice, control. That doesn't happen unless someone has mastered manipulation at the highest level, because Epstein doesn't just offer services, he created doubt. He made powerful people question the people around them, their advisors, their teams, and then he positioned himself as the only person they could trust. That's not finance, that's psychological control. So when people ask, how did Jeffrey Epstein get rich? They're missing the bigger picture, because this isn't about just money. It's about the system, the one that allowed someone like him to rise without resistance, to lie repeatedly, to manipulate consistently, and to move through environments where people knew something felt off, and still, he was allowed to continue. That's not luck, that's structure. That's what happens when power protects itself. And by the time the world finally saw him for what he wasn't just wealthy, he was connected, embedded in the culture, and untouchable, at least for a very long time. Up to this point, we've been talking about how Jeffrey Epstein has built his power. He moved through elite circles, he gained trust, how he positioned himself around the most influential people in the world. But now we need to talk about what he did with that power. Because everything you just heard wasn't a story, it was a setup. Behind his wealth, behind the connections, behind the image of a financial consultant, there was something else being built, something hidden in plain sight. Over time, reports began to surface that Epstein wasn't just surrounding himself with powerful people, he was also surrounding himself with young girls. And that wasn't random, it was structured. According to multiple investigations and victims' testimonies, Epstein operated a system that revolved around recruitment. Ghislaine Maxwell being not only his girlfriend, but also his primary recruiter, amongst many others, bringing these girls to him. Young girls, often in vulnerable situations, were approached, sometimes by other girls already involved. They were offered money, small amounts at first, typically $200 for a massage. That was the entry point, but once inside, the situation escalated. Boundaries were crossed, control was established, and what started as something that sounded harmless turned into something deeply exploitative. This wasn't chaos, this was methodical. He went after young girls that were vulnerable and desperate for money, offered them opportunities that sounded too good to be true, and then had them feel trapped because they needed that money, and he just took control of their minds, leading them to believe that they had nothing better than what he had to offer. Now let's talk about where all this is happening, because Epstein didn't operate in one place. He had multiple properties, each one playing a role in his world. Little St. James was his private island in the Virgin Islands, often referred to as Epstein Island. The location has become one of the most talked about aspects of this case. Why? Because of what many people believed happened in that place. Victims describe being flown in, guests arriving by private jet, a level of isolation that removed oversight and created an environment where control could be maintained. It wasn't just a residence, it was a controlled environment. He also had his Manhattan mansion. That was his townhouse. One of the largest private homes in New York City. Inside, reports described surveillance systems, cameras, rooms that raised multiple questions, and a constant flow of visitors. Again, not random. And in all of these places so far, you would find massage tables everywhere. Cameras everywhere. Recording and documentation was happening everywhere. There was his Palm Beach estate in Florida. This is where many of the earliest documented cases originated, where law enforcement first began connecting the dots and where victims came forward. Epstein also had a ranch called the Zorro Ranch, which was located near Stanley in New Mexico, yet another property utilized to fulfill all of his needs and desires to keep this entire machine working. By the mid-2000s, authorities in Florida began investigating Epstein. They had multiple reports by multiple victims, consistent patterns, and eventually a case was built. Now at this point, you would expect a major prosecution, given the severity of the allegations, of course. Even the number of individuals involved is one of the most controversial parts of this entire story. In 2008, Epstein reached a plea agreement, not a full trial, not a complete exposure of everything that happened, a deal. He pleaded guilty to lesser charges, and in return, he received a sentence that many people viewed as shockingly lenient. 13 months, not in standard prison, but in a county facility, with work release privileges, meaning he was allowed to leave the jail during the day to go to his office and return at night, 6 days a week.
He's got, 5 lawyers, 6 lawyers, 7 lawyers working for him, 2 or 3 PR people working for him. Brings in the former prosecutor went after the President of the United States. I would think that's a lot of artillery.
In addition to high-profile local attorneys Guy Fronston and Jack Goldberger, New York's Gerald Lefcourt, and Harvard appeals specialist Alan Dershowitz, Epstein's legal team includes the former Clinton prosecutor Kenneth Starr, who sources say has come to South Florida several times to try to make a deal.
Let's think about that for a second. For the crimes of that magnitude, all he had to do was sleep in a minimum security prison where he was treated like a king. And he could be home breaking the rules of wherever he was supposed to be because he did not follow the rules of this arrangement, and he would just get away with it, no questions asked. During his sentence, reports indicated that Epstein spent significant time outside of the jail, working from his office, continuing aspects of his professional life. Okay, we're not isolating him here. He's actually out there with the public. It was limited restriction at best. And when he completed the sentence, he walked out a registered offender, but still wealthy, still connected, and still operating the same systems. After serving his sentence, you would expect someone like Epstein to disappear, to lose influence, to be cut off. But that's not what happened. He maintained relationships, continued traveling, continued interacting with powerful individuals, because the network, it was still intact. And for years, he operated in that place until everything came back. In 2019, federal charges were brought against Epstein. In New York, more detailed allegations this time, with more evidence and more attention. This time around, it was different. He was arrested and held in federal custody, awaiting trial. And for the first time, it seemed like there would be a full accounting, a full exposure of everything. But the trial never happened. In August 2019, Epstein was found no longer living in his cell.
Some breaking news right now. Disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein has taken his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City. Epstein was facing Trafficking charges. NBC News investigative correspondent Tom Winter now has the very latest. Tom, what more do we know?
At the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York with the official ruling that he did this to himself. But the circumstances raised questions. There were security issues, procedural failures, unanswered details, and because of that, the case never reached a full conclusion. Now, at the end of this, it was very easy to focus in on one person, Jeffrey Epstein, to see the story as one man. But that would be missing the point, because Epstein didn't build this alone. He operated within systems and relationships that he built over time. These systems gave him access, they protected him, and they failed to stop him, even when the signs were there. And the truth is, that's the part that matters. Not just what he did, but how long he was allowed to do it. There is a lot of power protecting him and his secrets. Power that is slowly but surely being heard of and exposed. Thank you for subscribing to the channel, one where I bring you more of this exposure and more of these stories every day. One of those stories that we dive deeper into, you'll find right here. Hope that you go check it out, and I'll see you over there.